Hi guys, welcome back to another video. So we're working back on the VFC V3 project. This was, if you remember from our last video, a VFC V3 gbbr lower with an empty upper receiver. I've since fitted outer barrel, inner barrel, hop unit, hop rubber, barrel nut, and a bolt carrier group in here as well to make it fully functioning. If you remember last time, we were having problems with it and it wasn't functioning. We'd pull the trigger and just get like a well, effectively what is a light strike from the magazine. However, I've gone and tested it today. I've done nothing with this since last time you saw this. Okay, so let's drop that bolt. Okay, now I just tried it a moment ago and it was working fine. So, something's amiss here. So if I take the magazine out, rack it first. See, it's working now. That's actually got some hell of a recoil on it, actually, considering. Let's try an auto. That's impressive. However, if the magazine is in and we cock it, we get a light strike. Now, it shouldn't do that. It should still function correctly. So we're going to have the lower off and have a little look at it today and see if we can figure out what was going on. Now, having had a quick look last time, I suspect it just needs cleaning. I think what has happened here is someone has greased the firing pin, if you like, which is not actually a firing pin, YouTube. It's not actually a firing pin, but it's the pin that hits the valve on the back of the magazine to send the gas through the system. So I suspect that's what the problem is. But that worked really well when it was working. So what we want to do then is we want to have a look at the firing pin, which is inside here. So we need to get to that. So to get to that, the cock hammer here, and from what I remember on these, I'm going to have to drive this pin out. Now, this pin should be sprung loaded anyway. This bolt catch should be sprung loaded, which it's not. I don't know why it's not, so I'm going to have to look into that and try and figure out why it's not sprung loaded. And probably put a spring in there to hold it shut, otherwise it's just going to randomly lock open. So first things first, I need to drive the pin out of this so I can have a look at that. So let's get in the other side of this and try and knock that out. I didn't even need to knock it out, that's just fallen out. Okay. That was a little worrying. That shouldn't have dropped straight out. Now, one thing I've not noticed on this before is there's a little O-ring in here, which is obviously what holds it in place. It's a nice idea. I can see that working its way loose over time though, but could be wrong. So let's take this out. There is our bolt catch, which all seems okay. Now if we notice in the receiver there is a hole here. Hopefully you guys can see that. Now let me lift it up so you can see a bit better. In there, see there's a little hole. It's not all the way through, it is just a small hole in there. Now, that should have a spring in there, which then pushes against this, which sort of holds the bolt catch so it doesn't lock open, basically. But for whatever reason, that's not installed. So we're going to have to do that. Nice to see that steel as well. Obviously, that's also controlled by this, which is your ambidextrous catch here as well. Now, if we look in the top of here, we can see, hopefully, there's an Allen key. So that's what we need to unscrew to remove this section. So, get my favourite screwdriver. And we'll get ourselves an Allen key that fits that. I suspect it's a 2.5. No, it's probably a 2. Right. So we need to undo that screw. There we go. and then we should be able to lift this out. There we go. So that's that section out. Looks okay. Now, this is your firing pin, if you like. And again, YouTube, it isn't a firing pin. It's just my interpretation of what to call it. But effectively, this is the valve which, when the hammer hits it, it then hits the back of the magazine to then send gas through the system. Now, previously, what was happening is it wasn't going back properly. It was sort of staying forwards. So I'm going to have that out. Okay, now straight away, there's your firing pin. All looks good. But if we look in there, hopefully you can see this. I'll quickly zoom in, so hopefully you can see it. Just in here, we have a completely mangled spring. So I'm going to have this little part out. Okay, there we go, that's come out. There we go, there's a mangled spring in there. Zoom you back out. Right, so this mangled spring is obviously part of the issue. Now, from what I can see on the firing pin now, I've not had a V3 apart before, but I can see there's a little nub on this part here which fits in here, and basically the spring is just mullered. It's not going to do what it needs to do at all. It's completely destroyed. There you go. So that is no good. So what we need is a spring that can go in there and activate on that, so it then helps it come back, which is why we were getting that light strike. So I'm going to go looking in my springs and see if I can find something that I think will fit the bill. Obviously, it can't be too large, so I'm going to have to probably cut it down a little bit. So I'll have a look and I'll get back to you in a second, guys. Guys, so this is what I've come up with so far. So let me zoom you in so you can see. Now, what I should really be doing is that is the spring in question. Now, that is not savable. That is toast. Now, what I should really be doing here is measuring the gauge of the wire with some calipers and see if I can find something that's similar and then make it fit. I'm afraid that's not really my style. I tend to just sort of see if I can, wing it and make it work. So first spring I found is this one, which is a bit too thick a gauge, and that is not going to help. That's going to want to try and return the valve too soon. So that's no good. I've got another one here, which is, in pretty good shape. It's not quite as strong, but it's quite large, so that's probably not going to fit very well. And then I came across this one. Now this is from a, I think it's a VFC Glock, or it might even be the FNX actually. I think it's an FNX spring which pulls the barrel back into position. It got stretched and was no good, so I had to replace it. So I've got this, and the coil of wire seems about the right kind of size. Don't think it's quite the right length, but I think I can make this one work. So I'm going to get rid of those other two screws that are no good. I'll zoom you back out again. There we go. I'll get rid of those two. And what I'm going to try to do is just cut this down. Now, it looks like this wasn't very long. And, if you look inside here, clearly the spring wasn't very long. And if you look at this one, that looks like it's about half that length. So it looks about right. So what I'm going to do here is just cut the ears off either end here because I don't need those. And fingers crossed, this is going to do everything I need it to do. And we'll be golden. That should work, hopefully, perfectly. And if it doesn't work, then I guess I'm going spring hunting. However, I think we should be okay. So let me cut this one off as well. There go. Okay, so that's what we're left with now, which again is not too strong. So hopefully that will go in there okay. Now, first of all, actually, one thing I am going to do is clean this out. It has got grease in it. Now, lots of people will tell you to use grease in your gas blowbacks. I'm not saying they're wrong, because I'm sure there are certain circumstances where that is necessary. However, every single experience I've had with grease in a gas blowback has ended badly. It's always been a problem. It's just a magnet for dirt, especially if you're a skirmisher. Dirt gets in there, and then, you know, you're then having clearancing problems because the dirt has got in there and it's gone back and forth, and then it's worn it even incorrectly. It's just a bad mix. So anytime I come across any kind of grease, I just clean it out. A light oil is really, I've found, all you need. Now, again, I'm not saying you should believe everything I'm saying. This is just from my experience of messing around with these. I've found that, yeah, grease is just a big mistake. So any grease I come across in any of mine, I just get rid of it straight away. So let's just line this back up. If we can, there we go. This is also covered in grease, so I need to clean that off. Now this firing pin assembly seems to be steel as well, which is good news. Means it's not going to wear prematurely. I need to stop calling this a firing pin because YouTube are going to have my ass if I do that. So yeah, it is the valve striker, not the firing pin. Right, I need to try and get this straight somehow, which is probably going to be easier said than done. Yep, absolutely easier said than done. Oh, that's actually dropped on there nicely. There we go, that looks good. Perfect. Right, time to get this back in then. So let's drop that back into position. That needs to go in there without dropping the spring out anywhere. Okay, that's in place. So now I need to put this frame back in. This is a bit oily as well. I might give this a quick wipe down without dropping anything. Again, it's just got a little bit of, I'm not going to say oil, it looks like a, well, if it is oil, it's a very thick oil. So it's more of a grease, I would say. So that, go back in there, and then I can put the screw back in. And hopefully we'll have a correctly working V3. So wind that in. There we go. That's now tight. Shall I put the bolt catch back in? Yeah, I probably will. So I'll look for a spring for that now as well. Probably one of my previous ones I found might fit quite nicely. It's just typical that I've just lobbed them back in the box. I'm going to have to find them again. Hold on a moment. Okay, so this is the one I think I'm going to use, which was the bigger of those ones. It is a little on the large side, but I think it should work okay. It's just going to go into that hole. Yeah, there we go. Just fitted in. Now, it might be a little bit long, so I'm going to have to experiment with that. But for now, I think that'll be okay. So that needs to go in there. Let's get that under that as well. It is a bit long, I think. But let's see if I can get it to work. Again, the right thing to do here, obviously, would be to go on a VFC parts diagram and order the correct spring. However, I'm not about that, really. Oh, it's too long. Right. I think I had a short one in here.
Few moments later.
Hey guys, I'm back. So I tried a few springs and they're actually no good. So I've come up with this one, which I believe this is a valve locker spring. I'm not sure what platform from, possibly a Glock. But I think it's going to do what I want it to do. It's not too strong, because the other ones I was using so far, or I tried, were just way too strong. It was just going to, you know, not lock back on empty or anything, which is obviously what we want it to do. So hopefully I can push that in and get this back in place. It does not want to play ball, that's for sure. This is really awkward. That was going into place. All right, I think that's okay now. So let's try and get this pin back in. There we go, that's spring loaded now, which is what we want. Whereas before, that wouldn't do that. So let's try and get this in place. I must say, this ambi thing is not quite what I was expecting. It seems to... What's that? Can't tell if that's in the right place or not. What is this doing? Okay, I'm going to have this out because it's really frustrating me now. No, wrong size. All right, let's get the out. Get that out, see what the hell is going on, because it's annoying me. Not that it matters for me, because I'm right-handed, but it'll bother me if it's not right. Let's get that Allen key out. I bet it's supposed to be spring-loaded as well. Now, because it's like this, and there are like springs missing and things not quite right, it leads me to believe that potentially... No, it doesn't appear to be any springs. Oh, something's fallen out. It leads me to believe that this was possibly mid being converted by someone. So it's sort of being converted into a, you know, into this configuration from a different model, potentially. That's what I would, you know, expect anyway. So that needs to be the other way around. It is a bit of a faff, I must say. Right, let's try and get that in place now. Right, that seems to be okay. Let's get that in. Right, hopefully I'll never have to mess with that ever again. Yeah, that should be fine. Right, so now... Oh, God. What a faff this thing is. There. Right, I'm going to try not to mess with that because that's really annoying. So yeah, anyway, that all seems to be working correctly now. Let's try the upper out and see if we have a properly working valve striker. Hopefully. There we go. Right, let's try it out. So, from what I remembered, hammer forwards, mag in, cock it. There we go, working perfect. Nice. Lovely, there we go. So, yes, we had a problem, which was this spring. I don't think the grease would have helped much, but basically the spring was just binding up and not allowing the valve striker to come back out of the way, which is now doing, and which is why we're getting a light strike. So that's perfect now. Now I'm going to do a couple more fixes while we're here. Now, if you've watched my video I made about the BCM, which is, funny enough, this mag is from, you would have seen that I mentioned briefly, sorry, I'm just cleaning some bits out of the way so I can open this. I mentioned about the valve bounce, bolt bounce we get on these models. Now, the BCM is particularly bad because it's got quite a hefty bolt and it does bounce back. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video now in a moment and I'm just going to check it with my slow-mo to see if this bounces at all. If it does, then I'm going to change the buffer out for a real steel buffer. So I'll pause the video, I'll record it, I'll obviously play you the clip of it bouncing. If it does, then we'll go from there. Okay guys, so actually surprisingly, if you look at the video, there is very minimal bolt bounce at the moment, which is surprising actually, because generally most of the ones I've ever come across VFC wise bolt bounce like hell. Also the gas efficiency is affected by that. But if you watch, again I keep mentioning Explosive Enterprises, but they do a fantastic video on the V3, and they also mention about changing to a stock AR buffer. Now, what I've got here is a kit that you can get from Brownells in the UK actually, because you can buy these parts because it is just parts after all. They're not restricted. But this is actually a real AR buffer tube. Now, before YouTube throws me off and says, oh, you're fitting, you know, converting this into a real rifle, I'm not actually. What I'm looking to do is just change the buffer tube. Now, the buffer tube, as you can see, is the same length, but this is a real steel spec buffer tube, as is this a real steel spec recoil spring, which, by the way, I'm not going to use, so I'm going to get rid of that. I have used one in one of these before, and it will cycle, but for about 10 shots. It's just too strong. So there's our real steel buffer tube, which is anodized. The VFC one, I believe, is painted. The only difference is we might have to file off this little notch on the end here, which is to lock the buffer tube in place. But again, this is a real steel one. It's a hell of a lot lighter than the VFC one. And we also get in this, the real steel one, a rear plate, but we've also got a QD plate on this one, so we're going to keep that. And we've got a steel lock ring. Now, my experience with these lock rings can be a little bit hit and miss, if I'm honest. So we'll just see what it's like. It shouldn't rock around on the threads, which actually it doesn't seem to do. Some of them I've found really do move around the threads quite a lot, but that one seems pretty good. Now, the reason why we're going down this route really is just because I want the anodized finish, not this painted finish. You can already see the paint is wearing off of this, so this is no good for what we want. Now, the main reason why we're going through all of this anyway is to change this. So if you see my other video, and I'll show you what we're taking out in a moment, but this is a real steel AR buffer. I believe it's an 8 ounce, and you can hear, hopefully inside, there are weights in there. Now, the idea of this is it works a bit like a dead blow hammer. If you've never seen one of those, it's a big rubber mallet full of lead shot. And as you hit something, the shock is absorbed by the shot moving around inside the hammer. And it essentially works the same with this buffer. So what we're going to do is I'm going to remove the pins, take the mag out. Let's get the front pin out. If I can. There we go, get our upper off. I'm going to take the buffer out so you can see the difference between the two. Okay, so there's the stock VFC one, and there's our real steel AR buffer. Now, you can see they're the same length. Head diameter is the same. The chamfer here is the same. The main difference between these is, I say, this is sealed, has a nylon end, and has weights inside that move back and forth. This has a weight that moves back and forth. However, if I can get this apart, which I'm not going to be able to now. No. So basically this has a big metal weight inside it, but it's also spring loaded. If I show you, notice that squishes in. And the act of it coming back, it hits against the end of your buffer tube and the spring shoves it forwards. But again, that can cause belt bounce. Plus, this small section of steel is hitting your aluminium buffer tube and smashing the hell out of the inside of it. So, personally, I don't like to use these. I prefer to use one of these. So, we're going to get this buffer tube off. There's our recoil spring. Now, I'm not sure if this is a genuine VFC one or not. It seems a bit tough, actually, which might be why we're not suffering any bolt bounce. But I mean, it works fine at the moment, so I'm going to stick with it. So to get this off, what I need to do is remove this lock ring here, and for that you need one of these armourer's wrenches to get that off. Obviously we'll be turning it this way, so it locks in with that little nub you can see there into one of these grooves. We should be able to undo that. It's going to be tight. Oh dear, really tight. I'm going to have to give that a tap with a hammer, I think. Right guys, sorry about that. Whoever did this buffer tube up, I mean, it must have been mates of Eddie Hall or something. Jesus Christ, that was done up really tight. Okay, so now what we need to do is obviously get this off. I've now loosened it. It seems to rotate now, which is good. So I'll try and get that off, which I'm now just doing it up because I'm an idiot. So let's get that off. There we go. Right. Now I shouldn't need to do much else with that because now what I can do is I can press the detent in here. Now the detent is to hold the buffer in place, and that is spring loaded and will go down. It is kind of pinned in place at the moment, so that will press in, and then we can unscrew the buffer tube. There we go. Now you can see there's a spring coming at the back here. This is your detent for the pin as well, for the rear pin, so we're not going to mess with that too much. I have that off. That was on there seriously tight. Okay, so there we go. Now, weight between these two buffer tubes, this is a hell of a lot heavier. Now, that may sound like that's a good thing, but trust me, this is a far better made piece of equipment. Differences here, you can see this groove here is a lot longer, which has no bearing on what we're doing here with this particular airsoft gun. The nut is fairly tight. This one is not as tight, but obviously this is real steel spec. And by the way, VFC, WE, and a few others are real steel spec, so you can use real steel buffers in these, which you'll see now as I wind this in. As you can see, it's going in no problem. So that's good. Now again, this is a lot lighter. The only thing we will have to check out is how deep this is versus this one. Now obviously this is designed supposedly for real steel, so it will be plenty strong enough. But we just want to check how deep this is versus this one. So this being the old one, this being the new one. Because obviously the buffer is going to come back. If the bolt starts over traveling, we're going to have to pack the back of that out so we don't get any over travelling. So I need something that I can test that with. Get my calipers. Don't know whether this is going to be long enough. It might be, we'll see. Let's open that out. That's typical, I've gone too far. And there I am, gone and broken my calipers. Brilliant. There we go. Right. Okay, anyway, let's check the depth. So, and as is typical, it's not going to go deep enough. Right. I have to use something else then. See if I can use the actual... Yeah, it's not deep enough. Okay. Let's get something else. This should be deep enough. This is my flex hone, which I use for honing inside bolt carriers. So drop that in. Okay, so it's actually quite a bit shorter, I think. So that goes to about there, which goes down to there. So you can see there's quite a bit of material at the end of the buffer tube, whereas in this one goes down a lot further. So we've got that much extra travel, which we don't want. So what we're going to have to do is going to have to pack the back of this out to be able to mean it doesn't travel as far back. Now you can do that with a few different things. I normally use a nylon chock because it's nice and light. I'm going to need to go grab that, but I'll show you me putting that in. Or what you can use is washers. Washers the right size will go in, no problem. The only downside of the washers obviously is going to add weight, which we're trying to get rid of. This is quite heavy compared to this one, which is feather light. So I'm going to go get my little chock and I'll show you that as I fit that in. Okay guys, so I've realised my insert is, I'm actually using it in a different project at the moment and I can't bother to take that apart. So instead, I'm going to show you the method where you can use washers. Unfortunately, it is going to ramp the weight up, but actually with the washers I've got in there, it isn't actually as heavy as this. So what we want to do is basically pack the rear of this out with washers to the right length. So if I look at how deep this is, using my measuring stick, should we call it, I'm just going to put my thumb against whereabouts it bottoms out. There we go. And now if I put this in, that now bottoms out in exactly the same place, because what I've done is I've added a bunch of washers in, which are the right size. There we go, a stack of washers, which will increase the, or decrease, should I say, the depth of this, which then means you're not going to get the bolt over travelling. Again, just pop all those back in. Now again, I'm going to use a nylon washer, which I'll knock up on. I'll probably get my old man to knock me one up on his lathe or something like that, so we can then get the correct length. Now, another reason why I'm going for the real steel buffer is if you have a look, hopefully you can see this on the VFC one, the threads are all flattened off. Whereas if you look on this one, if you look at between the teeth are much more prominent on the real steel one than they are on this one. I don't know why they do this, but basically, I'm guessing it's so this can't be used in a real firearm, I would guess. I've no idea. But again, this is real steel one and it has much better thread. And again, the threads are cut deep enough in this for that to work, no problem, so it's fine. So I'm going to pop this back in place, which is going to push on that spring. Now again, I don't want the spring to fold over, so I've got to be quite careful with that, making sure that isn't the case. So I put that in and hold that in place. That spring is wanting to bend over, which is irritating. There we go, that's in. Right, so now I'm going to wind the buffer tube in. Yeah, I thought they'd all come out, which is fine, doesn't matter. Okay. So let's get all those out for now. There we go. Now, what I now need to do is I need to press this detent down, which will enable me to rotate the buffer tube round some more and continue to wind it in. I think one more rotation will get it all the way in. There we go. That's sitting nice and flush in there now. And now I'm just going to wind the lock nut back in again. I need to make sure I'm not crushing that spring actually. Let me check that. No, the spring is fine. So I'm going to wind that in. And then I'm just going to nip that up with my armourer's wrench. Which is easier said than done with this extra lump on the back. Try and see if we can go around a bit further. There we go. There we go. Now again, you don't need to go mega tight here. I'm just going to give it a quick nip, like so, and that'll be perfect. And that's now running a real steel buffer tube, and that should be nice and straight, which it is. Okay, so we need to put these washers back in for now. Now, like I said, I'm going to knock up a little nylon piece to go in the back of that to restrict how long or how far that travels back. Again, just keeping the stock buffer would be, the other way of doing it. So I'm going to put the spring back in and put my new real steel buffer back in. There we go. That is your real steel buffer installed. Perfect. So I'm now going to put the receivers back together. We'll just make sure the bolt isn't over traveling, which, it could be, but I've measured it out. It should be okay now. So we'll try it, see where we're at. Get that pin through. There we go. This rear pin's a bit of a pig. Give it a tap. No. How odd. It's always the case with doing anything like this though, it can always come back to bite you. There we go, it's going in now. That's it, that's in. There we go. Okay, now that should be just far enough back for me to engage the bolt lock. Yeah, literally just. If you notice that, that is on full travel all the way back. And if I let the bolt go forwards, it goes forwards like 1/2 mil. So that is perfect. It's exactly what you want. Okay, let's try it out. See what it's like. Now, there's not as much recoil because the real steel buffer is actually lighter and it doesn't have that spring in it either, but really snappy. Yeah, working perfectly. And there we go. So as you can see, fitting a real steel buffer on, really easy. So definitely worth the upgrade in my opinion. Mine was already damaged a little bit on the end here anyway, which is why I wanted to change it, and it was scratched up. Nothing wrong with this buffer tube. I don't see you would have any issues with it, but again, where possible, I like to use the real steel parts if possible. So if I had a used one, that'd be nice, but I'm trying to keep this looking nice and fresh, so no need to. Anyway guys, there you go. So what we've done today then is we've sorted our striker spring, because we had an issue with that, and then we also fitted a real steel rear buffer and stock tube. Obviously, I've spaced it out with some springs, with some washers in there, which are going to change. But that's now working perfectly, ready for the parts I'm going to fit to this to make it a complete rifle again. Make sure you check that out when I get the video uploaded. Any questions, fire in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.